Namaste. Welcome, beautiful souls. It's been ages since I've done a tarot collection video, and I am preparing 3 of them. In this video, I will share my mass market decks. In a subsequent one, I have put together historical decks and Tarot de Marseille in all of its iterations, and then I will do one with my indie decks. And so looking forward to this. It's a great time for clearing out. And if you have any questions, if there's decks you're interested in purchasing, please just send me an email through my website. Okay, I'm going to start today with these tarot decks in a tin, which I don't use very often, but find them really handy when I am traveling, particularly in the summer, going out to markets or meeting people at coffee shops and so forth to do readings. There are a couple of favorites here. The Vanessa Tarot is one. For me, it's kind of nostalgic, reminds me of a simpler time. And you can see these lids actually stay on, which is great. I do, when I travel, tend to put the tins and decks in a larger bag with a reading cloth. And that's how I travel with them. This is a bit kitschy, this deck. I do not have very many decks like this in my collection. Sometimes I just need a deck like this that is going to make me smile. And like I said, it reminds me of simpler times and ease in life. Vanessa reminds me a little bit of Samantha Stevens from Bewitched. And just, I don't know, she's kind of funny. I do have an indie deck that kind of fills the same niche. That is the World of Hilda Tarot. But this one is kind of cute. It's in a little tin. Now, this one, I don't know if when it originally came out, it came in with large cards. And if I ever saw that, I most definitely would purchase it because these pictures are very, very small. The creator is Leonard Narcisco. And you may be familiar of other decks by this creator as well. The Barbara Walker Tarot, I feel exactly the same way. I have not, believe it or not, in all of these years of studying tarot, taken the time to study this particular tarot deck. I purchased a used copy of her tarot book on eBay and have yet to purchase the large version of these cards, and I find them absolutely fascinating. I have read some of the initial chapters in her book that speak to Tantra, among other things, and love all that she has built into this deck. So it's not one that I read with. It really is one that I am yet to sit down and get a greater understanding of. The Inversion Tarot was inspired by the Rolls Nordic Tarot from 1960. It is a black and white pip deck. Looks really nice on a white tablecloth or even a floral tablecloth. The pictures are nice and clear. It is not a Tarot de Marseille. The pips are in their own unique formation. And the images are really clear. I think the creator did a great job in reproducing this deck. And there's one of the aces. The Ace of Pentacles is also really lovely. I do have a number of black and white tarot decks in my library, and there's something about not monochromatic, but a limited color palette deck as well as a black and white deck that sometimes just feels a whole lot simpler to read. The Stoller Tarot is done well. I love that this is a borderless deck. There is a little frame around the imagery. If you are a fan of Adam Stoller's cartoons and you read the tarot, you would quite enjoy this deck. It is RWS inspired. It is contemporary. It is funny. And like I said earlier, sometimes there is a place for a fun deck. That suit of balloons is really something. The other decks here on the table, I'm sure most of you have seen all of them. I will show you some Waite-Smith decks in a little bit. Morgan Greer, I will compare this deck with the larger one I was able to recently find. the White Sage Tarot. So I did have the indie version of this deck, and I did sell it because I didn't like the way that the cards were framed. There was just too much white for the artwork. And I love the compact version of these cards where you get the borderless section of the artwork with the title below. And while the chakra associations in this deck may not be in complete, may not be in complete agreement with, I find this a really interesting deck to work with. And I don't think any of these decks on the table here will be disappearing anytime soon from my tarot library. The sand dollars are just precious. The Morgan Greer in a tin I have had for some time, and it is one that I will pick first, second, easily to take with me when I'm running out the door to do a reading. And this deck has so much intention behind the color. I love this. It's very easy to read. It's very close to the Waite Smith Tarot, and yet it has some unique characteristics that make it its own deck. I had been looking for the larger cards and was fortunate to find, I don't know if it was on eBay, it may have been, this is a new deck. It came through, I believe, Lo Scarabeo in Italy. I may be wrong, but I'm just so happy now to have the larger cards. I love this artwork. I could stare at this Nine of Pentacles for some time. I really feel I would love to listen to her speak. I was very late to the party with the Wild Unknown Tarot. It just didn't grab me at first. And I don't really think it was until I read Blossoms and Bones, Kim Kranz's biography. Perhaps I was reading some other articles about her that I started to spend time connecting and understanding her work. The first version that I purchased, I am now working on as a coloring project and have been doing so for some time. I've made some videos speaking to that. And I plan to continue to color this deck. And because I am coloring it in Prismacolor pencil crayons, I can also erase what I've done if I learn something else and I want to color it in a different fashion. I'm trying to put intention into the color. It's not just a random thing. When the Pocket Tarot came out, I knew that I would use the Pocket deck, and unfortunately, I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate for some people because I don't use the guidebook, but in order to travel with it, I have to have the guidebook in the tin because the cards take up such a small portion of the tin, and I don't want the cards banging around in the deck. And this one, I love this one. It's a wonderful travel size of the Wild Unknown Tarot. This one I purchased because I saw that it was a special edition, and I thought that there would be more than one colored card. However, there was only one, and it is the Justice card. And so I purchased this deck just for the Justice card, and I don't know if you can still get this version of the deck. So this is not my coloring. This is Kim Kranz's special edition. One of my tarot students who knew that I liked this deck purchased a first edition for me and gifted this to me some years ago. And I'm really happy to have this. I do use this as a working deck. It's not put away as something I'm not going to touch. It has a special energy to it. Some of the cards are quite different. This is the Lovers, first edition on the left, and later printing on the right. And some of the line work is quite different in these cards. So it kind of takes me aback when I haven't had it out for a while, and then I read with it and I go, ooh, I might notice something different in a subtle change in any number of these cards. I promise, do a deeper dive into this deck. I know that a lot of people don't understand it, they don't appreciate it, and I would love to share my yogic personal journey with this tarot deck, and I will put some energy into that in the not too distant future. The next group of cards that I'll be sharing with you are cards that are currently on my reading table, on my stand, that I'm either doing regular videos with or working with so often that there's no point in putting them away onto my shelf. The Arthurian series has been on halt for some time, and I've really enjoyed working with these decks, and I will be coming back to also explore the Hallowed Quest starting at Ewell. This is the Anna Marie Ferguson Arthurian Tarot, and it is the one that inspired the series that I began on this channel. It is very soft palette. The guidebook is just brilliant. This tower card is, I don't know, it's just so beautiful. I've really enjoyed reading all that she has written in that book. Studying these cards has taken me on quite a journey of appreciating the intersection of suits. And in doing a comparison between these three Arthurian decks, I have started to better digest some of the Arthurian mythology. This is the deck created by John and Kathleen Matthews, and this one I have recently acquired an older version of the deck, and I can pull that out for you as well too. I have so much respect for this couple and their writings. I love listening to them on YouTube talk about the wealth of wisdom that they have, not just in this field. And I really like the principle, what they have done with this deck, and I am looking forward to doing the Hallowed Quest and sharing more with you about this particular Arthurian deck. Claire Duval's deck, I believe, is still only available with a French guidebook, I guess, and French on the cards as well. It is illustrated by Arthurien, so some of this artwork will look familiar if you're familiar with her artwork. This one also lines up very well with the other two decks, and through Google Translate and my modest French ability, I have been able to appreciate the guidebook and Claire Duval's take on much of this legend. And comparing magician cards across the three decks, comparing why a particular creator has chosen a certain aspect of the Arthurian tales for a certain card is just, it's fascinating to me. And something Claire has done in this deck is the Wren, the king, and the queen of each suit is a diptych, so they match up together. Really beautiful. This is an older version of the Arthurian Tarot by John and Kathleen Matthews, and I really wanted to have this, found it on eBay at a reasonable price, just for my own, just to satisfy my own curiosity to see if there had been any changes in the colors, in the design of the cards at all. Certainly in the printing, there is different filters on the artwork, and the borders are done a little differently. There is no white border outside the black, and you can see the little gold touches at the top of the archway. on the newer version of the deck. And again, I will speak more to this when I get to the Hallow Quest series. For those of you that follow me on Saturdays, you'll know that these 3 decks are never too far away from my camera. I have been studying these in a live discussion for months now. This is the Mythologia Fennica Tarot by Susanna Salo. It was gifted to me by one of my Finnish students and followers, and it has been an absolute pleasure to read the myths. She gifted me in the English version of the Indie Guidebook, so I was able to get a little deeper into the mythology. And I have been comparing the earth-centric qualities of this deck. Honestly, this mythology reminds me a little bit of Japanese Shintoism. The kind of not just pagan energy, but there's something about it that a couple of times I have felt that. This was an important journey in understanding the suit of wands and the suit of swords. I find that in a lot of European decks there is a crossover of energy, and I'm talking decks that kind of steer away from Waite Smith and the energy of air and the energy of fire. There is so much crossover, and it was really useful to use this deck to study that. And in my Saturday comparison, I chose these 2 decks to fill in the discussion, so to speak. Not that these 2 decks can't stand on their own for a discussion. This is the original version of the Greenwood Tarot, and there is, believe it or not, a lot of crossover between the Celtic mythology and the Finnish mythology, and I have learned so much in taking time to do this. And I am just starting to go through the major arcana in that series, and I am hoping to finish that in 2025, but we will see. This is such a beautiful deck. The guidebook is quite small for the minor arcana, and so I have supplemented that with the guidebook for the Wildwood Tarot, and also brought the Wildwood Tarot into some of these discussions. But I mean, it's just a gorgeous tarot deck, and I know many of you are awaiting a second edition. Some of you may have already received yours, and it'll be really fun. I did order it, so I will do a side-by-side when I get the new edition. The Margarete Petersen Tarot has been a formative tarot deck for me, and I did a deep dive with this deck on my channel and really got into a much more appreciation of the elemental correspondences. Love the poetry for the majors. I really appreciate what Margarete Petersen did with the court cards in this deck, and I am still uncovering so much with every time I read with and take time to look a little deeper at what's going on in the Margarete Petersen Tarot. Now, this is the copy of the deck. This was a 25th anniversary edition that I'm using for my Saturday chat. But I also have, I think I have more than 2 copies, but this one is one that I trimmed because the cards are really big and edged to match the back. And this is the one that when I'm doing readings, I tend to work with because the other copy is so large. The suit of coins is my favorite suit in this deck. It's so stunning. I love the handprints and the footprints, among many other things. The guidebook this is my first copy of the deck, and I call it my notebook for this deck, is just full of comments and reflections, and I think it's probably the best little white book. So yeah, this is Margarete Petersen, Mythologia Fennica by Susanna Sallow. And this is the Greenwood Tarot by Mark Ryan and the artwork by Jrskvaro. Carrying on with decks that are on my table stand and never too far away, I mentioned that I have been using the guidebook from the Wildwood Tarot to supplement my Saturday discussion. And this deck I use all the time. I use it for readings of any nature. Always I will do a reading on the Sabbats with this deck. I feel a great affinity to these cards and have learned so much from a deep dive, studying these cards, personal journeying with these cards, really getting to know the wheel of the year and how they are attached to certain times of the year. It's just been a real pleasure and privilege, and it's added so much to my own tarot journey to have the Wildwood Tarot be a part of it. The Druidcraft Tarot is another favorite. This is a trimmed copy. I pulled out an untrimmed copy just to show you here. And I know some people would think it's sacrilege to trim the borders. I believe it was in the guidebook for the Druid Plant Oracle that I read something about the knots in this border, and I don't know if it's exactly the same on the Druid Plant as it is on the Druidcraft Tarot, but I decided that for some reason I wanted to have an intact copy of this deck. I feel so comfortable reading with this deck. I don't know, it's just like coming home. And you'll hear me say that with decks that, aren't full of white people read by a white reader. There is an energy and there is something that comes off the artwork that speaks to me deeply. I think some of the artwork, like the wheel card, reminds me of my time in shamanic studies where she's drawing a circle around the fire. There's other cards that remind me of my own adventures. And I love some of the reflections in the guidebook. This tarot deck has an amazing guidebook that really is a stand-alone tarot reference. And I don't know a better guidebook that discusses the numbers and numerical associations in terms of the tarot. It does such a great job with that in connecting the major and the minor arcana. The Herbcrafter Tarot I also did a series with and have come to love this deck so much that it is not only out in spring and summer, but it is out year round. And I have such respect for Joanna Paul-Colbert and Letitia Guthrie, the creators of this deck. This deck makes me want to be a better person in that I want to spend more time with the plants. I want to be more conscious, more intentional. And every time I do a reading with these cards, I learn something. It's very well organized. You would think that if you don't know much about herbs and spices and plants, that this would be a very difficult deck to read with. But they've organized it in such a fashion that you can very slowly start to learn that, for example, all of the 10s are composting plants. They help to re-energize the soil at the end of the season. The 9s are fruit in full ripeness. And the aces are weeds, right? They're the things that grow first in the garden. And so there's a rhyme or a reason for how this deck is put together. The air plants are all tall. There's connections between threes, sixes, and nines. I have drawn all kinds of connections in many of these cards, and I just want to keep working with it. I can't put it away. And it comes out at the most surprising of times. My love for the Mythologia Tarot is deep and wide. I have found new friends in Sumer. I have rekindled relationships with Norse mythology. I have found profound yogic teachings amongst Kabbalistic teachings. Again, I did a series on this deck, and following the series, I had more and more questions. And so I did a special episode on the wild cats of this deck. I think I did one on the horses as well. And it's funny, Marie White, I believe she commented on one of them. And it's so nice to know that you are supporting a creatrix, you're supporting a deck that continues really to take on a life of its own. I find this deck works so brilliantly when people want to dive deep. And if you're looking for ancestral or past life connections, looking for deeper understanding and meaning, and this edition is no longer available. This is trimmed. I took off the side borders. The edition that is presently available is smaller, has silver edges, and about 5 or so of the cards are changed. I think they're on top. So Judgment, Three of Swords, Hierophant, High Priestess. Is that it? Is that why they're sitting on top? Those are changed. I don't read with this deck. I only use this one when I am comparing versions of these cards. The deck in the center has been in my acrylic stand since I received it. I am so enchanted with this deck. A couple of summers ago, I edged it to match the backs and the cards. This is a deck of feminine energy. It is quiet. It is deep. It is full of feeling. And if you are an energy worker, it is a magnificent deck to do that. There are some unique interpretations of the cards. The court cards have been changed. The variations on energy in some of the cards is really quite extraordinary, and yet it makes complete sense. There's some very sweet cards, like this Page of Swords. The guidebook, of course, is in French, but you can use Google Translate. I don't think I've ever used the guidebook for this deck. I mentioned court card names have changed. So instead of a king, there is a goddess. This is Le Tarot aux Ramures Étranges. So Tarot of the Strange Antlers or Tarot of the Strange Branches. It's a lovely deck to read. I find in the dark moon time, around the new moon time. And I think this card might be one of the most beautiful lover's cards I have ever seen. Finding peace with oneself, which ultimately isn't that what the lover's card is about. These two are on my stand right now. They are both newer to my library. This is the Daydream Tarot, and all of these decks I will link in the description box below in the order that I am sharing them. And I saw this deck, I don't know where I saw it, but I was really curious about it. There was something quite captivating in the artwork, and it was very reasonably priced, and I have been quite enjoying reading with it. It seemed a great deck to get around Halloween, which is when I purchased it just before that, and it's still out here. I really like the tens, and so many of the minors are pippish, but they all kind of make sense the way that the coins or cups are arranged. And the tens I mentioned the other day when I was doing a reading, I love the perspective that this creator has taken on the tens. The tens are about the end of a journey. And if anybody knows anything about the creator of this deck, I have almost no information. I did send an email to the creator and have yet to hear back from them because I would like to ask some more questions. And then this is a deck I wasn't going to purchase. I have another deck by Julia Jeffrey, and this one, when it first came out, which is the Witch Sister Tarot, there was something about the artwork that I found rather challenging. And then something happened. Something in me shifted. So at first, I was very judgmental. I was repulsed by the emaciated bodies and the scary faces. And then I started to see something different. I started to see a reflection of internal strength that has been a part of their story forever. I just feel moved and touched, and there's something here that has a lot to teach me. And the crone energy in this deck is just fantastic. And I trust that this deck, like Julia Jeffrey's other deck that I have, will become a staple in my tarot library. This is Tarot of the Hidden Realm. I have purchased this deck many times. I believe one of my daughters still has a copy. And I love reading with this deck. Of course, I have some favorite cards. And yet, I feel that I've read with this deck for so long that I can create my own stories with many of the paintings. And one of the things I think is really important in a tarot deck is that there is a good balance of light and sunshine and positivity, and that the challenges come through in such a way that they touch us deeply and help us to find the strength to do the work that needs to be done. I find a lot of wise counsel in this deck as well. And the children, oh my goodness, the children are so beautiful. I know that some people have found alternate style of illustration, different kind of intention with veering away from Rider-Waite-Smith challenging in this deck. But the guidebook is quite well written and can help you to discover new layers in unpacking certain cards that have been peg-holed into very specific imagery. I think it's a great deck for broadening one's perspective on the tarot as well. Also, close at hand on my table, I have a copy of the Thoth Tarot. This version of the tarot is trimmed, and it is my working copy. And I reference this deck all the time. I think that this is a brilliant deck. It really has helped build my understanding of the Golden Dawn system and working with the decans. This version of the Crowley Thoth Tarot came in the complete tarot kit. And if I do need a mini Thoth, this is the one that I use. And this is one of the first decks that I ever studied. And this is a copy of the Greenie that I purchased on eBay. I've had this a couple of times, and this one I'm actually leaving out and reading with for my own readings. It has a lovely tone to the cards, and there's just something about having older copies of a deck in hand. I have great respect for the shoulders that we stand upon as tarot readers, and when I can get at a fairly reasonable price an older copy of a deck, especially one that I love to work with, I do that. And the only other mass market deck on my acrylic stand is the Centennial Waite Smith. And I use this deck every time I'm teaching a class. I will often pull it out when I am comparing and contrasting other decks. I have studied this deck inside out and backwards. This is my favorite version of the Waite Smith, and I will show you some of the other ones that I have, though I've done quite an extensive series on that. I continue to see things in this deck that I didn't know were there, though I feel like I have done a pretty good job in getting to know this deck, thanks to the brilliant number of resources that are out there. And I think while it certainly is not an easy deck to learn to read the tarot with, it is an absolute important reference to have in your tarot library, and one close at hand for contrasting and comparing new decks as you acquire them. I wish I had unlimited space on my side table, but I do not, unfortunately. This is another favorite deck. This is Shadowscapes Tarot. Artwork is by Stephanie Puimunla. I see she has another deck coming out soon. I love the energy in this deck. This is trimmed on 3 sides, I believe. And I know that we are all waiting for an extra large anniversary edition of this deck to be published. The Czech version of this deck does a little bit better job. The cards are slightly larger, so you can see here they're a little bit larger, and this is readily available in the English-speaking world as well. And I created a little cheat sheet here. I do this in many decks where it's just not possible to remember either the foreign language or plant names or something, or associations with suits. And I often will create a little chart in Excel and stick that in the tarot box. I love the way that call them fae, whatever you want to call them, the figures in the Shadowscapes Tarot, they're so fluid, and often they move between realms. The water figures are not necessarily completely in water. It's a remarkable deck. If I could walk into a land and experience the energy of a tarot deck, this is certainly one place that I would love to visit, particularly the forest in the suit of Pentacles. I've had brilliant discussions about some of these cards with many of you. I believe I did 1 or 2 videos on this deck, and happy at any time to discuss any of these cards with you further. You might find it funny that I have so many decks with 2 or more copies. And here's another one, the Llewellyn Tarot. This one is completely trimmed. I use this as a travel deck, and there is, again, the major arcana in this deck are so beautiful. When I did the series, I believe it was Musings with Masha, that series looking at top major arcana cards, where we had to pick 5 for each major arcana. I could have chosen the majors from each of the majors in this deck. It would have been pretty boring for the series, but the art is so incredibly beautiful. And I think that the majors are the highlight for sure of this deck. there's something that's a little bit lost in the minor arcana, and yet that makes it easier to read. So in this particular deck, you're not looking at 78 legends to study. You have 22 plus then more familiar looking minor arcana. I did rebuy the deck because I had kind of regretted chopping off the top borders on the major arcana. I wanted to remember these names, and so from time to time I do read with the deck with borders. And I'll say that if I'm here at home, I'm going to read with this deck. If I'm traveling, I'm going to take the smaller version of the deck. And the borders are just beautiful. They certainly do not take away from the artwork at all. At one time, I was so in love with this deck, and I think I will always keep a copy of it in my tarot library, particularly for the suit of summer. I have the French version and the Russian version, and I'll show you both. The colors are a little bit different in the two decks. I love the aces, the way that they show the changing of the seasons. There is some humor in this deck, but for me, the highlight is the summer cards. And you see the Fae playing in the rivers and the streams. And I don't have any more too many decks that are actually, the suits are named by season. And so this is one that I will hold on to. And the Fool in this deck is such a lovely story and pathway into this deck. This is the only human in the deck. And here the Fool is chasing the fairies and then finds their way into the land of the Fae. This is the Russian version of the deck. I purchased this on eBay, I believe. And you can see it's a little more saturated in color. And honestly, I don't remember why I purchased it. I think at the time I was looking for an English version of the deck because I didn't have one. And I know that I can get my hands on one now for a reasonable price. It's funny, I have quite a few foreign language decks. I think at one time I did share with you all of my foreign language decks, and I think it's kind of fun. Adds something to the tarot library. On the left is Mother Peace, and on the right is Shining Tribe. And these two decks, I would love to, at some point, do a side-by-side and a little deeper study of these decks. I know some of you out there have had this particular one for a long time and hold deep respect for its energy. It's not one that I have had a lot of time to read with, and I did not get this deck when it was first published. But I think that the Mother Peace Tarot could build a lovely discussion with the Shining Tribe Tarot. This is not the current version that is available by the amazing late Rachel Pollack. And if you are looking for a deck that is non-binary, that looks very deeply at the elements and our relationship with those elements, this is a deck that can help us get to that place. If you are looking for tarot decks that do a better job of inclusivity, queer decks, non-binary decks, I'll share a few of those with you now. These two decks here are by Ari Weisner, and the intention of both of these decks was to remove humans from the deck so that became a non-issue. I think I saw one human, a small silhouette in one of these pictures. And so in both of Ari Weisner's decks, they are very pippish, but they're done so well. I did do a detailed walkthrough on this deck, and the familiar symbols definitely are here. The way that the minor arcanas are drawn, it makes so much sense. I think this is this deck for me checks off a lot of boxes, and another one of those boxes is also the limited color palette. And this is the Trinity Tarot by Ari Weisner, and it is a cute little square pip deck. Very similar to their larger deck, but this one has a white background and it is square. All the familiar symbols on the deck, and very few humans or human parts in this deck. And because of its size and its shape, a wonderful deck to travel with. Fifth Spirit Tarot is, I think, one of my favorite queer decks. I have in the indie series, you'll see a couple of more. I really like this one. The pips are excellent. So much has been added to them, and I feel that there was a lot of thoughtfulness put into this deck. And I said something earlier about a white woman reading from a deck with all white characters, and how could I appreciate and read from a black deck with all black characters. And in the same way, being straight, is there a place for queer decks in my library? And I just want to say absolutely. This is an important part of our culture and our society and the people in my neighborhood and my life. And I think as a tarot reader, it is important to see and to work with all kinds of tarot decks. I remember, I think one of the first ones I had was This Might Hurt. I don't have that one anymore. This one does such a good job with the minor arcana. These are lovely pip cards. The way that each of the elements is arranged, I think it's intuitively easy to read. And so you've got a lot going on with this deck, in that the pips are great and the level of inclusivity is outstanding. Do I feel excluded if there are no straight white people in this deck? Absolutely not. That's sort of a ridiculous thing to say. And I also find a sense of humor in some of these cards, which makes me very happy. I was going to put this deck with a grouping of Thoth inspired tarot decks, but I think it's worthwhile putting this one here. This is the Urban Tarot by Robin Scott. It is based in New York City and makes some very loud statements, and is certainly a deck that includes all walks of life and all kinds of confronting issues in our world today. The guidebook that goes with this deck is quite good, and Robin takes time to explain the background for a lot of the stories here. There's a couple of cards in this deck that I just really gravitate towards, and I find that in some of these situations, in some of the court cards, there's so much going on in the photograph that I have a lot of different ways that I could relate to and share the story with a querent. This one is the Fyodor Pavlov Tarot. It's a very special deck, and I did a chat with Jonathan Daly. We both did readings and we commented on this deck, and I was so overjoyed when I got this one in hand. Fyodor Pavlov has some Russian background. He's also they are also a New Yorker. And the blend of, can I call it, old world culture with queer culture is incredibly well done. And just look at the artwork. This is one of those decks that spills over the borders. And again, my favorite kind of deck really is this limited color palette. The Suit of Swords, I believe, is the one with the red. I really like those cards. This is a pretty great Eight of Cups too. That's one badass Queen of Swords. Love it. Like I said earlier, I wish that somehow I could have all my decks unboxed right there at hand at a moment's notice. Do you know this one? This is The Spirit Within by Stephen Bright. This deck also does a really good job with inclusivity in that all of the humans are in shadow. I also like the color coding of the decks and often recommend this deck to beginners. Color coding can really help in understanding, and with the silhouettes and the relative simplicity of the cards, I think this is a wonderful first deck, second deck to have together with the Waite Smith and to begin your tarot study. This deck is based in the UK, so you will recognize, if you live in the London area, many of the background scenes. The sun is a beautiful card. At sunrise at Stonehenge. I don't know if it will show up right here. I love the Hanged Man here. And I repurchased the Next World Tarot. This is by Christy Rhodes. I did have the tiny one because this one was so big. And I have since passed on the tiny one and reacquired the larger one because there is so much in the artwork. And I was missing something with the tiny cards. These are very large. Okay, these are anything but standard tarot size. But to appreciate the details in the artwork, I think you need cards this large. And this is most definitely a non-binary deck. It's also a deck of reform and dismantling white supremacy. And I should read you a line or two right from the words of Christy Rhodes in the guidebook. She describes it so very well. And in a way, I think that side by side with the Urban Tarot, which is a similar size, you could get some pretty deep readings here. The Next World Tarot aims to dismantle the patriarchal foundations of security culture, as it has silenced survivors of sexism and violence for far too long. The Next World is a femme hacker, eager to out the truth and tired of compromising her body for stability. The Next World is self-care as a right. The Next World is reviewing our definitions of gender and respecting those of others. The preface to this guidebook, I think, is such an important statement, and I think this deck is an important statement to have in one's tarot library. You are looking at the Hermit card for several decks in my library that I only hold on to should I be mentoring a beginner one-on-one, and I will explain more as I go through these decks. This is the Muse Tarot by Chris Ann, and I believe that each of these decks has a certain appeal. And there is a tremendous amount of creativity in this deck. There are some unique features. The kings are replaced by the muse of the suit. There are some lovely passageways and doors Some cards do have some deep reflections. It is a feminine collage deck, and one that I feel doesn't necessarily have deep connection, at least as deep as in the first group of decks that I shared with you. However, I think that as a tarot teacher, I hang on to decks like this because I do teach a lot of different students, and I often need to refer to specific cards. And so these ones here in particular, I smile because I would not do readings with these for clients. I just don't find they go deep enough, and there's something it's just not me anymore. I'm not sure it ever was. There's been a few decks like this that have been recommended to me. This is the Lightseer's Tarot, the mass market version by Chrisanne. And I understand the appeal. And there is a certain comfort in the ease with which one may be able to read a deck such as this. And this is not saying it is not without substance and there are not some beautiful cards. It's just that I prefer to work with something a little different now. Oh, this is the Hermit. I believe I put the Nine of Wands on the top to start with. This of these five, this is the oldest one here. This is the Everyday Witch Tarot. And this is quite a beautiful Hermit card. It is quite a kitschy deck. And there are some cards that remind me of familiar movie scenes, including Harry Potter. And there are a couple of cards in this deck that I still like very much. I do like the cheekiness and the Tower card and so forth, but it is not, it's not a deck that I presently read with. And it's interesting that I still have these decks lying around. And this one is the newest of these five in my library, the Unfolding Path Tarot. It was highly recommended by many different people. It is an attempt at diversity, better representation of the Waite-Smith Tarot. And yet, with the layers of energy that I'm working with these days, this is falls very much into the same sort of category as the ones that I just showed you. It's just not substantial enough. However, like I said, there is a place for this when you are just starting out and you need to find your way in building connections with the tarot. Sometimes you need something simpler and something that feels more contemporary. And I understand why a deck such as this is there for you. And yes, this one does do quite a good job with inclusivity, diversity. And the other one on the table really shouldn't be in the tarot category. You'll see this is a number 10 card. This, I believe, is very much an oracle deck. At least the major arcana is. This is a personal, very personal attempt by the creator to make the major arcana their own. It strays so far from the tarot that it is hardly a tarot anymore. There's something about the minors that's quite endearing. It is a seasonal deck, so there is a suit for each season. And there's the court cards I feel are quite pensive. And with those as well, I think you could put into a more complex oracle reading. This would be a very difficult deck to study as a beginner in the tarot. This is the Harmony Tarot by Harmony Niece. And I did a video on this. I was trying to make sense of it and see if I was missing something, but I don't think I am. I understand the creator's perspective, but I would very much put this into the category of oracle deck. And this is going to go into a box of decks that I will be passing on or selling. And here is another group of Waite-Smith inspired decks from various decades. The Fountain Tarot is quite an interesting deck, and I did a comparison video. I think it was Field and Fountain and the Starseeker Tarot, which is a indie deck. And if you're interested in these decks, that might be something to check out. This is the Queen of Coins. This is a really beautiful card in this deck. And there are some very interesting energies that this deck presents. It is I was going to say a non-binary deck. It's one that includes a variety of genders, and yet the lines are very blurred in this deck. So there is lots of room for, I can see it's sorted, for the imagination. I resonate deeply with a few of the cards in this deck, and through my years of study have come back and been able to speak more deeply about what is going on here. I believe this deck was put together by a collective of tarot creators. Some people describe this deck as cold, and it's indeed not warm in its colors. This is a deck that has the ability to blur the lines between reality and dream, between perhaps veils of this world and another. There's something quite interesting that happens with the different effects of the geometry even. It's not a deck that I would pull out very often. And sometimes I have a difficult time selecting a deck for a client, a masculine client, a client who is new to this kind of practice. And I don't know, there is something quite masculine about this deck. This is one that comes to mind easily, as well as one of the self-published decks that I will be showing you in another video, and that is the Vendur Tarot. The Field Tarot is quite similar actually to the Fountain Tarot. However, it skews feminine, where the Fountain Tarot skews masculine. It is definitely a pippish deck. You see far fewer humans in this deck. And it does also have these blurry lines that leave space for interpretation. I quite like this and prefer this style of a deck as a beginner deck to the last set that I just showed you. This is the Five of Coins. Disappointment. We have a rather modern looking human in the card, and yet there's something here that just feels quite pensive, poignant, and I can work with this for sure. Any card that has the chakras, the chakra colors, it brings a lot of curiosity and a yearning of wanting to understand where the creator was going with this. And this deck actually pairs really nicely with the Fountain Tarot as a yin and yang sort of side-by-side deck. And sometimes it's hard to put words to why I would keep this deck over any of the last group that I showed you. And if you have some impressions about anything that I have to say today, whether it is, oh, I know why Sadhana likes that or doesn't like that, please feel free. I'd love to hear your interpretations of my ramblings. This one, I did not get this deck very early on. This is the tarot of Lisa de St. Croix, and really have grown to love this one. It has some very great layers. This is the Page of Swords. We have this very important symbol here. Those of you that work with the Kelly Burton's B decks, and like to work with sacred geometry. Such a card as this is so wonderful. This deck travels across many worlds, many cultures, eras, times, and on the surface looks like quite a mishmash of cards, even art style for one artist. And yet there are some, it just kind of works together in a very magical way. This is a Ten of Wands that moves between day and night, traversing from one plane to another. We have an Indian sadhu here. We have what may be a North American First Nations tribe. It looks like we have almost like cherry blossoms on the Ace of Wands. The pages in this deck are quite lovely. Queen of Cups I really like. Nostradamus as the King of Wands. The Judgment card is amazing. This Four of Wands. It took me some time, but after reading quite a bit with this deck, it became a deck that was very easy to reach for. And I knew the kind of reading that I wanted to do with it. The Crow Tarot by M.J. Cullinane. I can't say enough about the oracle that pairs with this. Is a wonderful representation of the Waite-Smith Tarot with a theme of corvids. And there are crows and ravens and perhaps other corvids in this deck as well. I have done quite an extended video on this deck. It is not one that I reach for these days. However, if you were working with me and you wanted an animal deck instead of a human deck, and you didn't necessarily want a pip deck, this is one that I would suggest. The familiar symbols from the Waite-Smith Tarot are all here. And there's also some very, I don't know if you'd say in terms of crows, poignant, but important interpretations here, things that the creator has added from the perspective of the animal who shares this space with us. And I would highly recommend using this deck with the Crow Oracle, the Urban Crow Oracle, I think it's called. And I have had this deck since it was first released and will be holding on to this one for some time. Arthurian has created many tarot decks. This is Tarot of the Abyss, and it is a black and white deck that is full of flow and emotion, which is characteristic of her art. There are a few unusual cards that I really don't care for. However, one of the good things in this deck is the continuity of theme with the court cards. I really like what she did in each suit with the court cards. So there's a connection built among that. There's a story that is that connects all of them together for each suit. It's very heartfelt. And this is one that I would reach for in an instant when I was teaching if I didn't want to use the Waite-Smith Tarot itself. I feel like with this art, it's possible to go deep and wide in many different directions. This is one card that I don't care for, the Chariot. And the Knight of Wands is kind of odd. But there are more great cards in this deck than the few that I don't really care for. This is the Ace of Wands with the Phoenix on the palm. It's a great Three of Pentacles. So this is Tarot of the Abyss by Arthurian. The Mystic Medley Tarot is not a deck that I have read with. Purchased it on a recommendation. I thought it reminded me of old school Saturday morning cartoons, and it felt like one that might be kind of fun to have in my tarot library. I have flipped through it, and it reminds me a little bit of the Halloween Tarot, which I didn't show you. It was in the decks in a tin. This deck is, in a way, more closely related to the Waite Smith Tarot than that group that included the Muse and the Unfolding Path and the Lightseers. And I think I could have some fun with this particular one. Fairy tale, mythology. I do love working with these kind of decks from time to time. There's something about connecting with story. And this is Tarot of the Divine by Yoshi Yoshitani. And this deck has 78 different fairy tales and myths from around the world. Some of them are paired beautifully with the energy of the card upon which they've been selected. Some of them, however, not so much. And while the image might seem to fit, the story, and especially the extended story that's in the larger book, doesn't always do a great match. But I think that reading the deck without reading the fairy tales and myths, this is quite a substantial deck. If you sit and try to pair and make sense of why a particular story was chosen for a particular card, it can be a little more challenging to understand. However, I don't know. I've had lots of fairy tale decks over the years, and this is one that I have held onto. I love the artwork. I love the wide range of fairy tales, and I feel that the length of the stories. So even the extended guidebook, they are one-page stories, and it's all very manageable. And they are quite familiar, most of them. And I find that in some fairy tale decks, they're from lands and places I've never heard. It's very difficult to digest as a tarot deck. And so I would place it more in the field of oracle decks. However, this one is pretty good and would also be great just for single card pulls. And the extended book, it's a hardcover book that includes all of the stories, is just a delight to read. The Chrysalis Tarot has beautiful artwork, and it really does feel like walking through a childhood dream. It is not necessarily connected to particular fairy tales, but it has this fairy tale quality to it, and that's why I'm grouping it here with these other three decks. And it is one that I discovered quite late in my tarot experience, and I would like to spend a few months working with it and unpacking it further. I think it's really beautiful, and I do have the large guidebook that goes with it, and I think an extended guidebook as well too. I find it quite enchanting. This is the Enchanted Tarot. This is the 25th anniversary edition. I believe it's now in the 30 or the 35th year of printing, so this deck has been around for ages. It is a tapestry collage deck. You can see the needle point here. Each card is a labor of love. And the guidebook, the small guidebook, and by small I mean the descriptions are quite short of what is in each of these pieces of art, does really help to explain what you're looking at if you can't figure out the story through your own tarot experience. And I love the borders. It feels also kind of like a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale. I have a really old book from the 1960s, and it has kind of similar artwork. There's the hermit wandering down the path. And this just feels like a deck that I want to curl up with, a book. You want to sit on a cold night by the fire with your warm drink. This is a really special one. And the other deck that I have here is the original version of the Mythic Tarot that I acquired later in life. And I acquired this on eBay because I didn't have a deck that had Greek mythology. And I think that is really an important mythology to have in one's tarot library. Now, I do have the Red Seeds Tarot and the Red Seeds Oracles, but this one is more inclusive contains more of the Greek mythology than just the Persephone myth. So this one I have not worked with extensively, yet it is one that feels kind of feels like it's essential part of, completing my story section of the tarot library. I feel fortunate to have lived in different parts of the world, to feel connected to spirituality of different cultures and different places. And I, from time to time, am drawn to use a goddess deck or one that subscribes to a certain religion or spirituality based on a client's needs or a particular intention of my own. On the far right is the Osho Zen Tarot, which is one I have worked with for a very long time. And this is a trimmed copy of the deck that doesn't have the keywords on it. I worked with this for years exclusively, despite the fact that I found the suit of clouds, the suit of air, extremely difficult to work with and confronting. But there was so much wisdom and power in this deck that I found that it not only touched and moved clients in unexpected ways, but it continued to get me in my own self-study to ask some really difficult questions and to wander down some paths that I may not have had I not had this deck. The Dark Goddesses Tarot, I think this is a strange name for the deck. It should just be called the Goddesses Tarot. And yet, I have come to have a different understanding of the word dark. Dark in that dark equals feminine. So it's like calling the deck the Goddesses Tarot. Are there any goddesses in this deck that walk in the light? For sure there are. And it is pantheon inclusive. So again, we have goddesses from all different pantheons. And it is a great guidebook. And when you are feeling that this is the kind of support that you need, this is a very, very rich tarot deck that I would say you're going to use the guidebook with it. Single card pull, small card pull, maybe 3 maximum. And I think they've done a really good job in adapting the court cards, the suits, and so forth. Ellen Lorenzi Prince makes great decks. And it's funny, some of these myths, some of these goddesses I have encountered in different decades of my life, and I'm just smiling here. Again, it feels like stories from my past. It feels like important figures that just at the right time, they need to come back and I need to have a conversation with. This is a first edition of Robert M. Place's Buddha Tarot, and I purchased it as a collector's item from eBay. It's in amazing condition. However, I don't like to have decks in my tarot library that I am not going to reach for. And I believe it was it this summer? I did a daily pull. I tried to do weekly readings with this deck, and I just couldn't connect with it. I probably should spend more time with it, understanding its energy more deeply, because I know that I am familiar with the journey of Buddha, of the young Siddhartha, the lessons, the teachings, and yet I wasn't really feeling that in my heart, that it responded in that way in the readings that I did. And just saying that makes me think I should put this back on my acrylic stand again and do some weekly readings for myself. This is the Triple Goddess Tarot. It's not one that I have used extensively. It really is one that should fall into the Oracle category. It does not have 78 cards. It has 7 chakra cards, and then it has an unusual number of major arcana, so more than 22. It does align with the major arcana, and yet because of the unusual number of cards, that for me changes the energy that in working with numerology and things like that. And so this one, when I did work with it, I used it more as an oracle, working with the energy of the goddess on the card. And always, when I'm using a deck like this, I am sitting with the teaching, the writings. Isha Lerner writes a fantastic guidebook. And then reflecting on the choice of placing this particular goddess on that card, on that major arcana. I think putting this into my oracle library, it would probably get more use than sitting on the tarot shelf. The Hoodoo Tarot is one that captured my attention, and I have found the guidebook to be a wonderful spiritual addition to my tarot library. I feel like every time I do a reading with this deck, I learn something else about a culture of which I was not familiar. The spirituality of these root workers, the practices of these root workers. I also want to say that I have this tug in my gut for communities, cultures that have been enslaved in North America. And when we get to read stories and learn of practices of their authentic traditions, there is so much to be learned from that. Because I don't practice hoodoo, because this is something that is very unfamiliar to me, I would never use this deck out of respect as a reading, doing a reading for someone else, but in exploring layers of myself, exploring just the mysteries of life and all that has unfolded culturally, historically on this landmass. Taking time to do a reading with a deck like this, I think, is really important. I am and have been and always will be a student of the tarot. This is a museum quality copy of the Sola Busca Tarot that Jrskvaro published about 2019. It is a deck that I have yet to study. There are so many things that we have to learn about the history of tarot, and if you don't have the decks in hand that are being referenced, it is really difficult sometimes to understand what you are reading in a tarot reference book or in a PDF online. The reason I purchased this deck was because I need to study this deck. And also I had at one time was reading several articles that referenced this deck. And I really needed to have the card in hand in order to fully appreciate what was being described. All of these decks that you're looking at here are ones that I use for reference purposes. You know that I have studied several Golden Dawn decks, and this is the Hermetic Tarot. You can see it's all in order. I simply have it as a reference. I have pulled it out from time to time to pull out a certain card. I am so fascinated with this system, with the work of Mathers and all of the deck creators that created decks as part of their experience in that society. There is so much to learn. There is so much wisdom. And the more that I study, the more that I learned, the more that I appreciate the intersections among spiritual wisdom from all over the world. And I know that long after I have the energy and the technology capacity to have a YouTube channel, I will continue to be reading and studying about the tarot. This is the Universal Worth Tarot. There's several Oswald Worth decks out there, and this is another deck that I have for reference. I have a few Ouds Picard style decks, and so in this deck we have Oswald Worth is the major arcana, and then the minor is the Ouds Picard system. It was because I had fallen in love with the Crystal Tarot, and this is a trimmed copy of the older version. I think there's a newer version available now, that I purchased this deck along with this one here. I'll show you in a second, so that at one time I could sit down and study this particular system. And to me, this artwork is just absolutely stunning. And the minor arcana, the way that the Wands, Cups, Swords, Pentacles, the way that the coins, they're all arranged, makes so much sense. This is also another path into reflecting on the suit of water as the suit of swords, and learning more about the tarot and just expanding my knowledge, understanding. Christine Payne Towler has done quite a few deck reproductions, and this is her reproduction. Now, this one should probably be in the self-published decks section, but because I was showing you these two mass market ones here, I wanted to just put this together here. So this is another version of the Ouds Picard, and my intention is at one point to do a deeper study, maybe even with more decks of this system. Again, expand my understanding of the tarot. And for some of you might think, well, why all these systems and different ways of interpreting the tarot? Well, at some level, all of these paths cross. And when you have those moments where it just all makes sense, it's such a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I think the bottom line is that I just love learning. I wish I could remember the how or the why each of these decks made their way into my tarot library. It's been quite a journey. And I don't remember how the primordial tarot came into my awareness. All I know, this is sorted into suits, so you can see it's color coded. All I know is that from the time I opened it and started to do readings with it, it was kind of earth-shattering. This deck struck a chord very deep. It had reverberations, kind of into my bones. And I think this is a wonderful deck for really shaking things up. It does not give surface level readings by any stretch of the imagination. It taps into something that perhaps you didn't even want to know, that you weren't ready to hear. The suits in this deck are changed. Some of the majors are changed a little bit. There are a lot of masks in this deck, which I love. I love working with masks. This particular suit, called the Suit of Blood, you can tell by the color, is not the most earth-shattering suit in this deck. There are a range of, or I could say array of challenging cards in each of the suits, and some that are just a way of helping us build meaning and understanding of who we are and why we are. This deck by Sergio Tappe originally was published as Tarot of the Origins, and I learned about this when this revisioning of the deck came in. And of course, I wanted to see what it looked like in its original form, and I searched and searched, found it on eBay, and I have not opened this. I purchased this as a collector's item, and I believe the cards all have a white border such as this. And so I'm not going to open the cards. I'm going to keep this for now as a collector's item. Aren't the backs lovely? These ones are well worked with, and I would highly recommend this for doing deep work. And when I say that, you know, I've done videos before on shadow work. I'm not so much talking about that. I'm talking about bigger questions. Reasons for being kind of questions. Where have I come from? Where am I going? There's just something about this deck that beats to a very slow reverberating drum. I did, I believe, 2 videos on this deck, and if you search Primordial Tarot on my channel, you will find them. This next group of decks are all nature-based decks without being animal decks. And there is something about me and my connection to nature that is an important part of my lifestyle, also an important part of my, I want to say, my health, my wellness. This is the Gaian Tarot. This, I believe, is the original version of the deck. There may have been an indie version before this, and I know for a while there was a version that was available directly through the creator herself, Joanna Paul Colbert. This is the Llewellyn version. The one doesn't have shiny edges like the Schiffer. And this is a deck that I've had a varying relationship with. I am not a fan of photorealistic decks, whether they are collage or just photo decks. So when I can see clear faces in a deck of people from this century, I don't know, it's not my favorite. However, there is so much goodness in this deck that I have to overlook it. The court cards are fantastic, and this deck reminds me of the work that I have done in connecting to nature through yogic practices, shamanic practices. And there are a number of cards in this deck where I feel like I've had that experience. I've been there. I have been touched by that. I share this story. This is just a really profound death card. We're looking at the death of a bird, the death of a boat, life cycle. If this looks similar to the Herbcrafter Tarot, it's because the artwork is done by the same person. Guidebook for this one is done by, I believe, Joanna Powell Colbert as well. There's a number of cards that are done in such a way that they have become a favorite or a top 3 of a particular card, and this is one of them. This is the 15th Arcanum, Bindweed. The 9 of air in this deck is really special for me. It's about listening. And there is an elder leaning against a tree. If it comes up, I'll be sure to show it to you. I did share quite a few cards from this deck in the Top Majors and the Top Minors series that I did. And then I see a card such as this. So if humans are in silhouette, I find that a lot easier and more versatile to work with. This is a deck that I've had for some time. It's the Guardian Tarot by Beth Salonen, and it's not one that's easy to work with. Again, it asks some hard questions about our relationship with nature, about reciprocity, about the consequences of poor actions, and it uses these guardian spirits of the trees to tell the stories. And some people find this an odd deck, that the guardian spirits of the trees look like aliens. And I think if you connect with this deck in terms of the trees being anthropomorphized, or the spirits of the trees coming alive, if you work with green man, green woman energy, that this is quite a beautiful deck to work with. The colors are gorgeous. The reflections are poignant, potent. And if you really get into the heart of this deck, I think you can get beyond what might initially appear to be some difficult faces to look at. The Elemental North Tarot came to me quite recently, and I have yet to work with it. I purchased this deck because I am fascinated with symbols, and the combination of symbols and pictorial symbols on this deck, I think, is really well done. And I can't wait really to dive into all that is hidden and within each of these cards. It's going to be a bit of a Where's Waldo kind of project for me. It feels personal and exciting, very fun actually. And the deck feels very consistent across major and minor arcana. What I mean by that is the complexity, the layers of symbol appears to be there, not prioritizing majors over minors, that the complexity of layers is built in within all of the suits. Many of you have different versions of this deck. This is Dreams of Gaia Tarot. Not one I picked up early on in the game. Now, I have Raven Fallon's Oracle, the original version of it that I fell in love with a long time ago. And I hesitated to purchase this deck because I really didn't need another tarot deck that does its own thing. And so I decided that when I was going to work with this deck, particularly in pairings with her Oracle or as a standalone tarot, or when I needed to do a reading based in the elements, based in nature, that anthropomorphized the elements and had a kind of a mystical, magical twist to it, that I would read these cards from my tarot experience, from my yogi experience, from all of my experience, rather than worrying about what the creator intended. So many times, many different decks that I have worked with, I have found all kinds of wonderful connections in cards that the creator themselves didn't necessarily see or write about in their guidebook. And so when I've worked with this deck and done readings, I've just kind of allowed it to speak to me. And the dragons I love dragons. I have never found a dragon deck that really ticks off all the boxes. I've purchased a few over the years. sold them, gifted them, and this is the kind of energy that I really like. I really wanted Smoke, Ash, and Ember to be my dragon deck, but it just didn't have the oomph that I needed in a dragon deck. And then the last one in this group, this is another great guidebook by Isha Lerner, and this is the Tarot of the Four Elements, and it is sorted still. A lot of my decks are sorted because I teach with them, and it's easier to reference the cards when I put them away. I sort them. If you are looking for a deck that, again, I mean, probably the Elemental North Tarot does something similar, but I haven't worked with it. And this one allows the archetypes and the energy of the elements to beat loudly. I feel this deck is a little bit like the Primordial Tarot, but it's not so confronting. And we don't always need a confronting deck. And yet this image of the lovers is quite confronting. One of the things I suggest for beginner tarot students is to work with the elements one element at a time and really get to know your relationship with the element and build a good vocabulary for the element and know how you respond to the element. What is your comfort level with that element? And having a deck like this can really help with that. Curated art decks or something similar. There is a place for this in my tarot library, and you will see some of these as well in my self-published group that I will record a little bit later. Often there is a particular painting that calls to me and draws me to the deck, and I may have seen a reading with that particular painting, that particular card, and I just feel that I want to hold it in my hands. Sometimes these will take me back to a time in my life, or I will feel a connection to a querent in a querent's past life, or there's a lot of different ways that decks come to me, and sometimes it can just be a gut feeling. This is the John Bauer Tarot, and I don't think any of these decks that when I read with them I overanalyze the interpretation, or I question why this particular piece of art is on this particular arcanum. These, I could have put this deck with the fairy tale decks. I feel that these paintings take me back to children's books, children's stories, and I find this one quite easy to read with. And I know there have been creators out there, content creators, who've done some deeper dives into this deck, connecting the actual painting, the story of the painting, to the particular tarot card, giving it greater meaning. But for me, I don't read this deck at that level. There's just something in John Bauer's artwork that I really like. And I have no problem reading with this deck as a tarot deck. I know there have been a number of people that have cut off the top and bottom borders and made this an oracle deck. This is the Touchstone Tarot by Kat Black. This is a beautiful collage deck that kind of seamlessly puts together familiar tarot imagery into these, or along with these Renaissance and Baroque paintings. It kind of reminds me of that game. Oh, there was a game I played when I was a child called Masterpiece, and I just loved looking at the paintings. It's like having an art gallery in your hand, and it's just a really special experience to read with a deck like this. It has an old world vibe that is very different from reading with a historical deck or a Tarot de Marseille. I have almost no contemporary decks that I read with at any frequency, and I prefer to use silhouettes, historical figures, energetic figures, to be slightly detached from what is on the card. Sometimes I feel if it is too close and too personal, it can be really difficult to get an accurate reading. And I know for a lot of people with the tarot, they want to see themselves in the tarot in order to get an accurate interpretation. And I think the more that you read and the more experience you have, the more comfortable you will be with getting away from that. This is the Gustave Doré Tarot, and I purchased this because I saw some amazing cards discussed in a discussion group. And I am, again, only working with specific paintings to do reflections. And I shouldn't say again, because I don't do that with the John Bauer, but I feel like with every archetype and every card in the tarot, there are an unlimited number of layers that can be reflected upon. And this kind of a deck really gets me thinking and studying and going down rabbit holes. And I like that. I just think this is a really soft and beautiful deck. The creator of this deck was inspired by Art Nouveau. Again, there's just something a little bit removed from now and from something too close to home. And sometimes when I'm doing a reading, I just want to get lost in the beauty of the art. And I often find that working with art decks helps querents to focus on beauty itself and their relationship with beauty. Beauty as grace, beauty as healing, beauty as peace. There is a couple different iterations of this deck. This is, I believe, an older one. There's a moon one as well, too, that's all sort of in blue colors. These 4 decks have no apparent connection other than they are, one might say, Thoth-based. And I think I want to expand beyond that they are Golden Dawn-based. This is the Vision Quest Tarot. It was on the altar during a training that I did, and I pulled a card or two from this deck just about every day over, we didn't meet every day, but over the course of a year. And I had to have my own copy. It's a pip-based deck like the Crowley Thoth Tarot is. And it is nature-based and shamanic-based. And there are so many beautiful teachings here. In a way, it reminds me a little bit of the ethics of the Wildwood Tarot. Our responsibility, our relationship with nature is so important. Amazing devil card here. Some of these cards, I feel the energy is just jumping off the artwork. I would love to have an original painting from this deck. The Suit of Water is just gorgeous, as is Fire. This is a deck I would not hesitate to pull out for any number of readings, and really it's one of the decks that, if I had more space, would be out more often. I have not had new era elements out in a very long time. I purchased this deck for the Dalai Lama card, which is the Hierophant. And there are some great cards in this deck. This Hermit is one of them, as is this Adjustment card. There's your Hierophant. It is diverse culturally, and I love the sepia tones in this card. Seahorses as two of cups, love. There are a few extremely challenging cards in this deck, triggering cards even, which I will not put on the screen. This card reminds me a little bit of a card in Poppy Palin's Everyday Enchantment Tarot. And there are some cards I love, love, love in that deck. I no longer have it. And there's something about the specificity of the contemporary symbols in a card that just throw me off. And it's like they're too pigeonholing. I need more space in a tarot deck to understand, to draw connections for a variety of querents. And so it's why I tend not to use decks that have a lot of contemporary challenging pictures, even just contemporary decks in general. I do love I mentioned before that I love limited color palettes in a deck. This is a trimmed copy of Sun and Moon, and I find this one is really interesting as a second study deck if you're studying a Thoth deck. It's really sweet, and I think that the energy that flows through each of the suits is very cleverly done. I love the suit of water. This deck I actually purchased again. I believe it was for the Hierophant card. And it's funny how certain cards draw us to a deck. It is the one with the mantra on the wall. I took a scan of this and I sent it to a couple of different friends in India, and they couldn't read this, so I don't know what this actually says on the wall, but there was something about this card that I really loved, and this magician. And there's lots of tarot decks that have a very similar energy for magician, but as a whole package, I think this deck is quite clever, and I like the artwork. The Voyager Tarot has been around for a long time, and there are a number of resources for this tarot deck. It is Thoth-based, and it is so cleverly put together. One of my favorite resources for this book is the book of poetry that accompanies these cards. And it's really given me an opportunity to sit with the tarot in a different way. I find poetry very soothing. It helps to center me. It helps to bring me, calm me, prepare me for readings. I have a number of collage decks, and this one I find I can find my way into the collage. I don't get confused or lost about what I'm looking at or why something is included in the collage. More often than not, I'm wowed. It's yes, I need to remember that connection. And often there are familiar symbols, and they are presented as bits and pieces in the collage. Some of the card names are changed. Some of the suits have a slightly different name, yet at the same time, it's all quite familiar. And it's not as, I want to say, complicated as reading a straight up Crowley Thoth deck. Let's just call this next group wacky, weird, wonderful. They don't really fit together. Just a number of decks that I have opened the boxes. This is Tarot de Luz. I love the pink backs. I edged it in pink. Love the size of the cards. I really do like the size of Fournier cards. It might remind you a little bit of the artwork of Paulina Cassidy. It's a very sweet little deck. It feels very simple, and I feel like I've said this many times during this video. I prefer simple, I prefer blurred lines, images that just let me be creative with where I want to go in a reading. This is the Lo Scarabeo Manga Tarot, and I know there are a few tarot decks that go by that name. I have removed the borders, the multi-language borders. I spent quite a bit of time with this deck because I was really interested in the correspondence of the seasons and how the energy of the seasonal symbol in Japanese on the deck fits into the meaning of the card. There are quite a few changes in this deck, but I found it very eye-opening to work with, and I spent quite a bit of time studying this deck. You'll probably find 2 different videos on my channel. This is the Dreaming Way Tarot by Rome Choi, also been trimmed by yours truly. It is another very odd deck. It really perhaps is a dream world of the creators. There's some really funny cards and some unusual presentations of familiar cards. The color palette is really quite nice and easy to look at. I haven't had this out in ages, but it still feels quite familiar, and I read with it for quite a while, and I really enjoyed the readings that it gave. It is very loosely Rider-Waite-Smith, and I think some of the odd cards really challenge our perceptions of traditional meanings of the tarot, and others look quite familiar. This is a deck that I purchased for past life readings. I was doing a lot of them at one time. The court cards and the major arcana are beautiful oil paintings. I actually have a large book that goes with this as well too. The minor arcana is very pippish, not in Marseille style or anything like that. This deck has a ethereal quality about it, and it really took me wandering in all kinds of directions to various cultures and places when people were looking for those kinds of readings. It is a Fournier deck, so again, it's that lovely size, super easy to shuffle. And with the sepia tones in the major arcana, I find that color palette is really good for wandering in all kinds of directions. This is Tarot of the Secret Forest. And over the years, I've had all kinds of Fae decks, and not so many of them are still around in my library. And this one is very blurry. I love this card here. It's hard to really focus in on exactly what is in the card. It feels like a bit of a dreamscape to me. Rarely do I use this deck, but I find it quite beautiful. And it's very unique because when you turn it over, you have the same images in black and white. And so you're going from kind of a sepia tones, not really, I mean there's other color here, but it's very muted. And then on the back, all the same images are in black and white. So that's Tarot of the Secret Forest. The Mystical Dream Tarot, this is one that I just picked up this week to do some readings. Purchased it a couple of years ago. I was really fascinated with some of the profound readings that were written about these cards. based in Jungian dream interpretation theory. And the images here, the paintings here, are dreams of the creator. I love this little portal here on the Hermit card. All kinds of name changes, unusual depictions of cards. This is the Tower card. Some beautiful scenery, and yet you find yourself in sometimes the scenery is a little bit mixed up, just like in a dream. And I remember this Eight of Swords coming up in a reading. Oh, probably I did this just after I received the deck, and I spent ages and ages kind of wandering into the painting, and I think it's a great deck for journaling with, inspiring great writing. Now, this is not really a tarot deck, but it is a tarot deck for me. There are 78 cards here. They are all titled, hand inked by myself. This is Soul Cards 1 and Soul Cards 2, with 78 cards selected to create a tarot deck. This is my Two of Fire, Two of Passion. This is Knight of Fire. This was such a fun project. I believe I did 2 videos on this, journaling or journeying with my process, why I chose the cards that I did. I think this is a wonderful use of Soul Cards 1 and 2. It's a great project for kind of challenging yourself to what particular arcana mean to you, and imagine wanting to create a tarot deck being inspired by a particular artist who has a vast body of artwork, and then trying to choose 78 paintings to match to the tarot. And this was sort of part of the process of doing this. It was a great project. And this is a deck that is very personal. I have used it for readings with other people when I am close to them energetically. I feel that this taps into the energy body at a very deep level. Very different vibe. This is the Essential Tarot by Pablo Mont. I purchased this for its simplicity because I wanted to talk about the choice of symbols, and in choosing one symbol to represent a particular card and how one might go about doing that. I also have a set of tarot coins just for the majors, 22, and I think it's another great tarot exercise to, and you can see that there's the Hermit with the lantern. Not so complicated for the minor arcana, but this kind of a deck in this level of simplicity, I think is great for comparison and deeper understanding, especially if you are new to the tarot. Carrying on with wacky, weird, wonderful. This is the Transparent Tarot by Emily Carding, and I cannot say enough about this deck. I have spoken about it many times on my channel. I've done a workshop with Emily, and they have really created something great to work with here. I would highly recommend this deck to serious students of tarot to start to contemplate, again, the importance of symbols and layers in the tarot. This deck, you can read cards singly and lay them out, and you can also layer cards to put together your reading and read vertically rather than horizontally. You can probably put together 5 or 6 cards in a layer and begin to see the cards in a different way and the relationship among the cards in a different way. It is wonderful for telling stories. If you feel uncomfortable with reading in an interpretive manner, this is a wonderful deck to help you to story tell your readings. And just the way one can place layers of cards upon the other, it's kind of an important deck to have in one's collection. The last deck in this group is the Illuminated Playing Cards. This deck came out in a larger format. It was more colorful, and I don't know if it went by the same name. The creator is Caitlin Keegan. And in this 2-pack, so there's 2 packs of 52 cards, and you can use these as playing cards, and you can use them as tarot cards. What the creator has done is assign major arcana to the playing cards. So this particular card here, you can read as the Ace of Clubs, the Ace of Wands, or you can read it as the Strength card. That is the case in many of these cards. So here is the Tower as the 6 of Clubs. And it's really kind of fun. I did talk about the other day on another series that I'm doing about using tarot cards for playing card games. And it's a really fun exercise to do, to play a game of crib or a game of blackjack with tarot cards. You can do it by removing the major arcana and one of the court cards. But here you have 52 cards, and yet you also have the tarot assignments on some of the cards. And so it's a really creative use of a playing card deck. And I have one other one that is like this that I will show you in my indie series. One of the challenges of putting this marathon together was to decide how to present these decks. And so I hope some of these themes or quasi-themes have made sense and helped you maybe build connections among decks in a different way. Of the 4 that are on the table now, the one that I have used the most is Tarot of the She. It took me some time, but I have built a lot of personal meaning and layers with these cards. I have used this deck a lot. It is trimmed, doesn't have left and right sides. The elemental energy here I find works with how I read. And when I'm looking at this card here, I'm kind of reminded of the Guardian Tarot that I showed you earlier. Like the Guardian Tarot, some people don't like this deck because the faces, there's an eeriness about it. But once there's a book about the She that was written by John Matthews. The backstory of the creator, Emily Carding, is really quite something. If you know something about the energy of the She, it really does help to get into the mood of this deck. But what I have found the gift of this deck is to help with very challenging problems. And when you are ready to face something and dive deep into your work, it's a wonderful, wonderful deck for that. Not a deck to be feared at all. The Deviant Moon Tarot by Patrick Valenza, I have not used a lot compared to many of the other decks in my library. I have studied this quite a bit. I have had some amazing readings and deeper understandings of what is going on in the cards. The coffee table book that accompanies this deck, you have to buy it separately, really does help to understand and open the world that is behind this particular deck. And I have a lot of respect for the vulnerability of the creator to build this story and to build this deck. It's another deck that you can use to open dreamscapes and perhaps issues that are buried deep within. There are cards that may disturb, awaken. The color tone is just, it's wonderful. And I've said this before today, that the sepia tones, in a way, they support dream work. They support getting lost a bit in the reading, where we almost give ourselves permission to go wherever we need to go. And what I mean by that is, I find that when we are new to the tarot, we seem to be more concerned about what a particular card means. The more you read, the more you learn that that's not so important. What you're looking at is the big picture of the cards that are on the table, and so many other kinds of connections. And with less color, sepia tones, it makes space for that. It allows for a bit more wandering, less specificity. I just repurchased this deck. I sold it years ago, and I repurchased it because I showed you earlier in this video the Daydream Tarot that I recently bought. And I want to sit down and do a side-by-side of this deck with the Daydream Tarot and do some reflections on these funny characters. I just feel like I didn't give this deck enough time. The guidebook for this deck, I remember, is excellent. This is the Shadowland Tarot by Monica Budersky. It's lovely cardstock. And the other deck on the table is the Santa Muerte Tarot. This is a great deck that I don't have out often enough. I find this one a little bit easier to read with than the Marigold Tarot, which I will show you in a subsequent video. I've had, over the years, a few different decks with bones and skeletons and things, and this is one that I've held onto and really been woken up by some of the messages that have come through. The colors are beautiful. All right, drum roll. This is the penultimate group. These are decks that are so very close to the Waite Smith Tarot, yet they find their own way through subtle changes to that deck. This is the Ehrenberg Tarot, this is the Hanson Roberts, and this is the Robin Wood. Robin Wood was one of my first tarot decks, and I spent so much time exclusively working with this deck. It was my best friend. It was my study deck. It took me down all kinds of rabbit holes. The artwork is so familiar, and I have done so many readings with this deck. And it's funny, when I first started, I did have the mini Thoth deck, a mini Waite Smith. This was the one that I found at a bookstore, and I decided that if I was going to learn to read the tarot, which somebody told me apparently I already knew how to do, that this is the one that I was going to learn. And I loved Robin's backstory. I felt so connected to her. I loved that she wrote about her time in Okinawa. And yeah, so this is one that's very close to my heart. The Hanson Roberts deck. This one looks a little bit like a fairy tale. And so this is why I have this particular one. There are other decks we could compare this to, but I love the I'm just going to say fairy tale like interpretation of the cards. It feels like an old storybook. And these are smaller size cards, which is also really nice if you have little hands. Just let me show you. Right? So they're quite a bit smaller, which is kind of fitting for a deck that feels like a fairy tale, like a story. And when I put this deck next to the Ehrenberg Tarot, I feel like the Ehrenberg and the Hanson Roberts would go really well side by side. And what happens in this deck is you go really close into a specific aspect of each card. And this might not be your particular go-to symbol or the place that you go to in this card, but I think for the most part, this is done really well in this deck. The focus that the creator of the deck has chosen. I love this 9 of Wands. And so I wanted to show you these 3 decks before I lay out all of my Rider-Waite-Smith variations. Rather than show you all of these decks, which would take another 30 minutes or more, I am going to put a link to a series of videos that I did comparing in detail many of these decks that you see here. I will open a few of these boxes because they're kind of unusual, and that way you can make your own decision about color, about style. My intention for that mini series that I did was to better understand what's going on, or what was going on in the PAM A, the PAM B, the PAM C, the PAM D, the different variations of the deck that were published over the years. And did it make a difference? And were some of them better than other ones? And which of these decks was most authentic, and which one should I be teaching with, and so on and so forth. Well, I learned a lot. Some of these decks are in English, some of them are not. And they were published over a variety of years, and I don't believe that this box is available anymore. And this particular deck here is now published as this one. And it's such a funny name for this deck because it is not the original. It is not a PAM A deck by any means. And so if you're interested in that level of detail, please have a look at the link in the description box below. Smith-Waite Black and Gold is not a deck that I ever show on camera because it doesn't show up well. I purchased this for doing readings at a New Year's Eve party, and it shuffles beautifully, and I really quite enjoy reading with this at that sort of a special occasion. And this one is not shown in that series that I just mentioned. And I know that this version of the deck does come in a slightly different color as well. When I showed you the mini Crowley deck that I had, I mentioned that it came in the complete tarot kit. And this was a kit that I purchased a long time ago. It's quite faded, actually, this one. The colors. This is probably a PAM C. I'm not sure. I don't think I included this one in my study either, but this was the first version of the Rider-Waite that I worked with, and I journaled and I wrote copious notes with. This one I probably shouldn't be showing you here because this is not a mass market deck. This is by Tarot Collectibles. So I don't know why I put it here. I also have the Winter Waite, and I did have the Trip and Waite at some time. This particular one is the Groovy Waite borderless version, and it's just really fun. It's just really fun. So there has to be a particular occasion where I would use a deck such as this. But it's actually quite true too. It's very good. This is the Wiser Tarot. The changes in color in this particular deck are really beautiful. They're certainly not true to the Waite-Smith, but artistically speaking, they're a really beautiful change. And in this deck as well, they've also included people of color. And that is a lovely addition to this particular version. Quite like this one. However, my working copy, the version of the Smith-Waite or Waite-Smith Tarot that I use the most, I've already shared with you, and that is the Centennial Waite-Smith. And I find this color palette just feels slightly antique. It is one that is always on my tarot stand, and I do have it sorted. Rarely do I read with it other than in classes, because I use it for teaching and comparing. And so when I'm showing a new deck or comparing decks, I will often pull out this particular one, and I can quickly sort through and get the card that I need, that I'm teaching with. And I believe I have emptied drawers, shelves, and shown you most of my mass market decks. If I do find more, I may mention them in the subsequent series. But it's time to wrap this up, and if you've got this far, thank you for watching, and I do look forward to your comments. Take good care. Namaste.